Before we begin the story, let us know where you're watching from by leaving a comment below. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the story. The door swung open with such force that the crystal vase on the nearby table trembled. Ethan, aged 34, stood frozen in the doorway, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the hotel suite's plush carpet. His breath caught in his throat as he took in the vision before him. Layla, aged 29, sat perched on the edge of the king-size bed, a goddess carved from ebony. Her dark skin glowed in the golden lamplight, making the white silk robe she wore seem to shimmer around her like a halo. Her eyes, deep and intelligent, met his with a defiance that stirred something primal within him. "So you're my husband," she said, her voice rich and melodious, not a question, a statement tinged with something like amusement. Ethan's jaw clenched as he stepped into the room, closing the door behind him with deliberate control. "By paperwork only," he said, loosening his tie, suddenly feeling as though he couldn't breathe properly. "Let's be clear about what this is." Layla rose from the bed in one fluid motion, and Ethan couldn't help but track the movement. She was tall, graceful, and the robe clung to curves that made his mouth go dry despite his anger. "And what exactly is this, Ethan?" she asked, her head tilting slightly. "Your father wasn't particularly clear about the finer details." "A business arrangement," he said flatly, tossing his jacket onto a nearby chair. "My father's final manipulation. Unite Carter Enterprises with Nova Technologies through marriage, secure the Carter legacy, create a corporate empire." His bitter laugh cut through the tension-filled air. "Very medieval of him, don't you think?" Layla moved toward the window, moonlight streaming in to illuminate her silhouette through the thin robe. "Medieval or not, I agreed to the terms," she said, turning to face him, her expression unreadable. "The question is, what kind of husband do you intend to be?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications. Ethan felt a surge of heat that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with the way her robe had parted slightly at her throat, revealing the elegant line of her collarbone. "The kind that's honest," he said finally, forcing his eyes to meet hers rather than wander. "I want to make something clear here and now. On our wedding night," Layla raised one perfect eyebrow, waiting. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken possibilities. "I will never love you," Ethan declared, the words harsh in the quiet room. "I'll respect you, I'll honor you publicly as my wife, but I will never give you my heart. That wasn't part of the arrangement." Something flickered in Layla's eyes. Pain, perhaps, or anger. But it vanished so quickly he might have imagined it. She moved toward him with deliberate steps until she stood close enough that he could smell her perfume, something exotic and intoxicating that made his pulse quicken traitorously. "Is that your vow, Ethan?" she asked, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Your wedding promise?" Ethan swallowed hard, suddenly aware of her proximity, of the slight parting of her full lips, of the warmth radiating from her body. "Yes," he managed, his voice rougher than he intended. "That's my promise." Layla reached up, her fingers brushing his cheek in a touch so light it might have been his imagination. "Then I accept it," she said. "But I have a condition of my own." The question came out. She smiled, and there was something dangerous in the curve of her lips. "That you remember this moment. Every word, every promise." Her hand dropped away from his face, leaving his skin burning in its wake. "Because one day, Ethan, you might wish you'd never made it." Her confidence, the certainty in her voice that he would come to regret his words, unsettled him more than anger would have. Ethan stepped back, creating distance between them, trying to regain his equilibrium. "I don't break my promises," he said firmly. "Good," Layla replied, her smile softening into something almost pitying. "Neither do I." She turned away from him, moving toward the bathroom with unhurried grace. "I'll change for bed. It's been a long day." Left alone, Ethan ran a hand through his dark hair, disturbed by the encounter. He'd expected tears, perhaps, or cold anger, reactions he could have dealt with easily. Instead, Layla had met his cruelty with a calm certainty that somehow made him feel as though he'd already lost a battle he didn't know he was fighting. When she emerged minutes later, she had changed into silk pajamas that covered considerably more skin than the robe, but somehow seemed more intimate without the performance of their earlier exchange. She looked suddenly younger, more vulnerable, her face freshly washed and her hair falling in soft waves around her shoulders. "I'll take the couch," Ethan said gruffly, grabbing a spare pillow from the bed. Layla paused, studying him. "The bed is large enough for both of us without either having to sacrifice comfort." When he hesitated, she added, "I'm not going to seduce you in your sleep, Ethan. Your virtue is safe with me." The hint of teasing in her voice made something twist unexpectedly in his chest. "It's not that," he protested, though they both knew it partially was. "Then what, afraid you might accidentally touch me in the night and discover I'm not the enemy?" Her perceptiveness was disconcerting. "The couch is fine," he insisted, turning away from her knowing gaze. Layla shrugged, slipping beneath the covers. "Suit yourself, though it seems a waste to pay for a luxury suite, only to sleep like a college student crashed on his friend's couch." As she reached for the lamp, the light caught the simple platinum band on her finger, the matching pair to the one he now wore, symbols of a union that existed only on paper, devoid of the emotions that should accompany such tokens. "Good night, husband," she said softly, turning out the light and plunging the room into darkness, broken only by the silver of moonlight through the windows. Ethan stared at the ceiling, the couch indeed proving as uncomfortable as she'd predicted. Across the room he could make out her silhouette beneath the covers, her breathing already evening out into sleep. He'd married a stranger, a woman chosen by his father's calculating business mind. He didn't know her favorite color, her childhood dreams, whether she snored or spoke in her sleep. Yet somehow, in the space of a few minutes, she'd managed to make him feel like she knew every secret corner of his soul. Ethan punched the pillow into shape with unnecessary force. This was going to be a long night, the first of many, in what promised to be a very complicated arrangement. Chapter 2. Forced Proximity. 3 weeks into their marriage, Ethan had perfected the art of avoiding his wife. Between early morning departures and late-night returns to their shared penthouse, he'd reduced their interactions to brief, necessary exchanges about household matters. The sprawling luxury apartment, a wedding gift from his father, was large enough that they could go days without crossing paths if they tried, and Ethan tried very hard indeed. Until fate forced his hand. A torrential rainstorm had settled over the city, thunder rattling the windows of their penthouse as Ethan arrived home earlier than usual. His meetings canceled due to the weather. He froze just inside the door, water dripping from his coat onto the marble floor. Music filled the apartment, something soulful and bluesy, and with it came the sound of movement from the living room. Quietly hanging his wet coat, Ethan moved toward the sound, stopping abruptly at the archway. Layla was dancing, lost in the music, completely unaware of his presence. She wore fitted yoga pants and a cropped tank top that revealed a strip of her toned midriff. Her feet bare, her hair piled messily atop her head. She moved with natural grace, her body flowing with the rhythm, eyes closed, completely unself-conscious in her solitude. Ethan knew he should announce his presence or retreat, but he found himself transfixed. This was Layla without armor. No designer suit, no careful words, no measured distance. Just a woman moved by music, beautiful in her abandon. A floorboard creaked beneath his foot. Layla's eyes flew open and she stumbled mid-turn, her expression shifting from shock to embarrassment to guarded neutrality in the span of seconds. "How long have you been standing there?" she demanded, reaching for the remote to silence the music. "Not long," Ethan lied, his voice rougher than he intended. "I didn't mean to intrude." Layla crossed her arms, suddenly vulnerable in her casual attire. "You're home early." "The storm canceled my meetings," he said, gesturing vaguely toward the windows, where rain lashed against the glass. An awkward silence stretched between them before he added, "You dance beautifully." Something like surprise flickered across her features. "Thank you," she said cautiously, as if suspecting a trap. Lightning flashed, followed almost immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. The lights flickered once, twice, then plunged the apartment into darkness. "Perfect," Layla muttered. Ethan heard her moving in the darkness. Then a soft glow appeared as she activated the flashlight on her phone. The beam illuminated her face from below, creating dramatic shadows that emphasized her high cheekbones and the fullness of her lips. "There are candles in the kitchen," she said, already moving in that direction, "and I think emergency lanterns in the hall closet." Soon, the apartment was dotted with flickering candles, casting everything in a warm, golden glow. The rain continued its assault on the windows, the storm showing no signs of abating. "The building manager texted," Layla said, looking up from her phone. "Power's out in the whole block. They've started the backup generator, but it only covers essential services. Emergency lighting, elevators, security systems." "I'll be in my office," Ethan said, grasping for some semblance of his normal routine. "I have reports to review." "In the dark?" Layla's voice carried a hint of amusement. "On your laptop? That's probably running out of battery?" The practicality of her observation left him without a rebuttal. "I suppose that's not ideal," he conceded. "I was about to open a bottle of wine," she said, gesturing toward the kitchen. "Care to join me? Unless you prefer to sit alone in the dark, contemplating quarterly projections?" The teasing lilt in her voice caught him off guard. In their brief interaction since the wedding, Layla had been unfailingly polite but distant, matching his own demeanor. This playful side was new, or at least newly revealed to him. "Wine would be good," he found himself saying. In the kitchen, Layla moved with practiced ease, locating a bottle of red and 2 glasses. The candlelight played across her skin as she poured, turning it to burnished gold. When she handed him a glass, their fingers brushed, and Ethan felt an electric jolt at the contact. "To unexpected storms," she said, raising her glass in a toast. "And their consequences," he added, clinking his glass against hers. The wine was excellent, rich and complex. Ethan watched over the rim of his glass as Layla took a sip, her eyes closing briefly in appreciation. He looked away quickly, disturbed by his own fascination. "So," she said, leaning against the counter, "this is the longest conversation we've had since our wedding night." The directness of her observation startled a laugh from him. "I suppose it is." "You've been avoiding me," she stated, not a question, but not an accusation either. Ethan considered denying it, then decided honesty might be simpler. "Yes." "Why?" She tilted her head, studying him with genuine curiosity. "I've honored your terms. I haven't made any emotional demands." The delicate way she phrased it reminded him of his harsh declaration on their wedding night. A flicker of shame warmed his cheeks. "It seemed easier," he admitted. "Cleaner." "Ah." She nodded as if he'd confirmed a theory. "The problem is, we live together, work together. Avoiding me requires more effort than simply coexisting." She was right, of course. His elaborate avoidance strategies had consumed more energy than simply developing a comfortable routine with her would have. "I suppose we could establish some ground rules," he offered. "For coexistence?" A smile played at the corners of her mouth. "Like what? You get the kitchen on even days? I get it on odd days?" "That's not what I meant," he protested, though he couldn't help but return her smile. "More like expectations, boundaries." "Tell me something about yourself," Layla said suddenly. "Something that isn't in the extensive dossier your father undoubtedly compiled before arranging our marriage." Ethan couldn't help but laugh at her bluntness. "Like what?" "Anything. A childhood memory, a secret ambition, your most embarrassing moment. Something real." The request was reasonable, yet it made him uncomfortable. Sharing personal details seemed like dangerous territory, a step toward the emotional entanglement he'd vowed to avoid. Yet there was something about the candlelight, the storm, and the rare moment of peace between them that loosened his usual reserve. "I wanted to be a photographer," he said finally, "before my father convinced me that the family business was my only legitimate path." Layla's eyes widened with genuine interest. "What kind of photography?" "Landscapes mainly. I traveled through Utah and Arizona after college, spent a month camping and hiking, capturing the canyons and rock formations." The memory brought a smile to his face. "It was the last time I felt completely free." "Do you still take pictures?" she asked. Ethan shook his head. "Not in years. My father called it a hobbyist distraction." Something like understanding crossed Layla's features. Parents have a way of reshaping our dreams to fit their vision, don't they? "Speaking from experience?" he asked, suddenly curious about the woman who had agreed to marry a stranger. Layla took a sip of wine before answering. "My mother wanted me to be a doctor. Practical, respectable, secure. She nearly disowned me when I dropped pre-med to study computer science. But you reconciled. Ethan found himself genuinely interested in her answer. A shadow passed over Layla's face. Eventually, after I sold my first company for 8 figures, success has a way of changing parental perspectives. The dry humor in her tone made him smile. And your father left when I was 8? She said matter-of-factly, though Ethan sensed old pain beneath the casual delivery. Just walked out one day and never came back. I'm sorry, he said, meaning it. Layla shrugged, but the movement seemed forced. Ancient history. She studied him over her wineglass. What about your mother? Your father I've met, obviously, but your mother wasn't at the wedding. She left when I was 12, Ethan admitted. Decided the life of a corporate wife was too constraining. Last I heard, she was living in Bali with a yoga instructor 15 years her junior. You blame her? Layla asked softly. For leaving? The question was unexpected, penetrating layers of defenses he usually maintained around this particular wound. Sometimes, he admitted, but I understand it better now. My father was a difficult man to live with. Demanding, unyielding. Like father, like son, she suggested, though her tone held no judgment. Ethan's eyes snapped to hers. Is that how you see me? I hardly know you, Layla reminded him gently. But from what little I've observed, you learned his lessons well. The observation stung with its accuracy. How many times had Ethan prided himself on his resolve, his uncompromising standards, only to hear colleagues mutter that he was just like his father. I'm not my father, he said, more to himself than to her. No, Layla agreed, surprising him. You're not. There's something in you that's softer, though you try to hide it. The insight made him uncomfortable, as if she'd seen through carefully constructed armor to something vulnerable beneath. Ethan stood abruptly, moving to refill his wineglass, needing the moment to collect himself. When he returned to the living room, Layla had settled on the couch, legs tucked beneath her, looking more relaxed than he'd ever seen her. The candlelight softened her features, highlighting the natural beauty that needed none of the makeup and careful styling she typically wore to the office. Why did you agree to this arrangement? He asked, settling into an armchair across from her. To marry a stranger for a business merger? Ah, Layla's expression grew contemplative. Practical reasons, mostly. The merger made sense financially. Our companies complement each other. She paused, swirling the wine in her glass. But, if I'm being honest, there was more to it. Marriage to you, a man who explicitly stated he had no emotional expectations, offered a kind of security, a partnership without the complications of love. Someone hurt you, Ethan guessed, watching her face carefully. Layla's smile was sad. Doesn't that happen to everyone? Eventually. Before he could press further, a particularly violent thunderclap shook the windows, making them both jump. The sudden sound broke the intimate atmosphere that had developed between them. It's getting late, Layla said, setting down her empty wineglass, and the power isn't likely to return tonight. Right, Ethan agreed, suddenly aware of how much time had passed, how easily conversation had flowed between them once they'd started. We should probably get some rest. At the hallway, where their separate bedrooms lay in opposite directions, they paused. Thank you, Layla said, her voice soft in the darkness. For what? For talking to me, she said simply. For seeing me as a person, not just an inconvenient arrangement. The candlelight flickered across her features, softening them, highlighting the vulnerability that she usually kept carefully hidden. Ethan felt a dangerous urge to reach out, to touch her cheek, to discover if her skin was as soft as it looked in the golden light. Good night, Ethan, she said, turning toward her bedroom before he could act on the impulse. Good night, Layla, he replied, watching her retreat, the gentle sway of her hips as she walked away making his mouth go dry. Alone in his bedroom, lit only by the candle he'd brought with him, Ethan stared at the ceiling and acknowledged an uncomfortable truth. His carefully constructed barriers were already beginning to crumble, worn away by a single evening of genuine conversation. His wife was not just beautiful, but intelligent, perceptive, surprisingly vulnerable beneath her composed exterior. Getting to know her, really know her, would be dangerous to the emotional distance he'd promised to maintain. Yet, as sleep finally claimed him, Ethan found himself looking forward to breakfast, to seeing Layla in the morning light, to continuing the conversation that the storm had unexpectedly begun. Chapter 3. Undeniable Chemistry. The corporate charity gala arrived 6 weeks after the stormy night that had shifted the dynamics between Ethan and Layla. In the intervening time, they'd established a cautious routine. Shared breakfasts when their schedules allowed, occasional dinners, conversations that gradually ventured beyond surface pleasantries into genuine exchanges of ideas and experiences. The evening of the gala found Ethan adjusting his bow tie in the mirror, smoothing the lapels of his tuxedo. From the adjacent master bathroom came the sound of Layla's hair dryer, then silence. "Layla?" he called. "We should leave soon." "Almost ready," she replied. "Just finishing my makeup." Ethan turned as the bathroom door opened, and his carefully constructed composure shattered. Layla stood in the doorway, wearing a midnight blue gown that clung to her curves before flowing gracefully to the floor, with a slit that revealed tantalizing glimpses of her leg as she moved. The neckline dipped low enough to be alluring without crossing into inappropriate, and her hair was swept up in an elegant twist, emphasizing the graceful line of her neck. "You're staring," she observed, a small smile playing at her lips. "You're stunning," Ethan replied honestly. It would be rude not to notice. Something flickered in Layla's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, at his candor, followed by a warmth that made his heart beat faster. "Thank you," she said, crossing to her jewelry box. She selected a diamond bracelet, holding it out to him. "Would you mind?" Ethan took the bracelet, his fingers brushing against her palm. She extended her wrist, and he carefully fastened the clasp, intensely aware of her pulse beneath his fingertips, of the delicate bones of her wrist, of the subtle fragrance emanating from her skin. "Thank you," she said, her voice softer than usual. Their eyes met in the mirror, and something electric passed between them, a silent acknowledgement of the tension that had been building since their first meeting. The Metropolitan Museum of Art had been transformed into a winter wonderland for the charity event, with crystal chandeliers casting prismatic light over ice sculptures and white floral arrangements. As they entered, Ethan felt Layla's hand tighten slightly on his arm. "Nervous?" he asked quietly. "Not nervous," she corrected, her smile professionally bright but not reaching her eyes. "Just remembering the last time I attended an event here." Before he could inquire further, they were surrounded by business associates, board members, and society figures, all eager to meet the new Mrs. Carter and congratulate them on their recent merger. Ethan found himself watching Layla as she navigated the conversations with practiced ease, charming even the most skeptical of his old guard colleagues. "Your wife is remarkable," Gregory Thompson, his father's oldest friend and confidant, commented as he appeared at Ethan's side with 2 glasses of champagne. "Your father chose well." Ethan accepted the offered drink, bristling slightly at the reminder that his marriage had been his father's design. "She's more than a good business decision," he said, surprising himself with the vehemence in his tone. Gregory's eyebrows rose. "I'm glad to hear you say that." There was concern among the board that this arrangement might be professionally advantageous but personally strained. "The board should focus on our stock price, not my marriage," Ethan replied, more sharply than he intended. "When the CEO's personal life affects company performance, they become intertwined," Gregory said, sipping his champagne, his eyes shrewd over the rim. "But I'm pleased to see that doesn't appear to be an issue. You seem genuinely happy together." Ethan's gaze found Layla across the room, laughing at something an elderly donor had said. The sound carried across the space, rich and musical, drawing his attention like a beacon. "We're finding our way," he said honestly. The orchestra began a waltz, and couples moved toward the dance floor. On impulse, Ethan excused himself from Gregory and made his way to Layla's side. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Carter?" he asked formally, extending his hand. Surprise flickered across her features, quickly replaced by a warm smile that reached her eyes this time. "It would be my pleasure, Mr. Carter." As he led her to the dance floor, Ethan felt the eyes of the room upon them. This was their first real public moment as a couple, and he found himself wanting it to be more than mere performance. "You know," Layla said as his hand settled at her waist. "When you suggested we present a united front, I didn't expect it to include dancing." "Consider it method acting," Ethan replied, guiding her into the waltz. His hand at the small of her back registered the warmth of her skin through the thin fabric, the subtle curve of her spine as she moved with him. "Besides," he added, his voice dropping lower, "I've wanted to hold you like this all evening." The honesty in his voice surprised them both. Layla's step faltered slightly before she recovered, her eyes searching his face with an intensity that made his breath catch. "Ethan?" she began hesitantly. "What are we doing?" "Dancing," he said lightly, though they both knew that wasn't what she meant. "You know what I'm asking." Her voice was low, meant only for him, despite the crowded floor. "These past weeks, something's changing between us. I need to know if it's real or if we're just getting too good at pretending." The question hung between them, weighted with all the careful interactions of the past weeks, the growing comfort, the undeniable attraction that neither had acknowledged directly. "Would it be so terrible if it were real?" Ethan asked, tightening his hold on her waist, drawing her incrementally closer. Before she could answer, the music changed tempo, and the moment for private conversation passed as other couples pressed closer on the dance floor. They continued in silence, the question hanging between them as they moved in perfect synchrony. Later, as they mingled with donors, Ethan noticed Layla grow tense beside him. Following her gaze, he saw a tall man with silver-streaked dark hair approaching. Victor Grayson, aged 42, CEO of a rival tech firm, and if memory served, a notorious corporate raider with a penchant for hostile takeovers. "Layla," Grayson said, a predatory smile spreading across his handsome face. "Or should I say, Layla Carter now? Marriage certainly agrees with you, you're positively glowing." The words were complimentary, but something in his tone made Ethan instantly wary. Beside him, Layla had gone very still, her smile fixed. "Victor?" she acknowledged, her voice perfectly controlled. "What a surprise." "Is it?" Victor's gaze shifted between them, assessing. "I make it a point to keep track of my competitors and former associates." Ethan felt Layla stiffen further at the word associates. He placed a protective hand at the small of her back, the gesture instinctive. "Ethan Carter," he introduced himself, extending his free hand. "I don't believe we've formally met." Victor's handshake was firm, to the point of aggression. "Victor Grayson, your wife and I have history." "Ancient history," Layla cut in, her voice steady despite the tension Ethan could feel radiating from her body. "And hardly relevant to tonight's event." Victor swirled his champagne, his eyes never leaving Layla's face. "I disagree. I think your husband might find our history quite relevant." He turned to Ethan, his smile sharpening. "Did she tell you we were engaged 6 months ago?" "Right before she agreed to marry you, in fact." Revelation hit Ethan like a physical blow. He maintained his composure, years of boardroom negotiations serving him well, but his mind raced with questions. 6 months ago, just before his father had proposed the merger with Nova Technologies, just before Layla had agreed to marry a stranger. "Victor!" Layla's voice held a warning note. "This isn't the place." "When would be the place, darling?" Victor asked, false concern in his tone. "After your husband has become properly attached, or perhaps after the merger is too far along to unravel." Ethan felt cold fury building in his chest, not at Layla, but at the man before them, deliberately causing a scene, trying to hurt her. "I think this conversation is over," he said, his voice low but carrying absolute authority. Victor's eyes narrowed, but he recognized the steel in Ethan's tone. "Of course, far be it from me to disrupt such a loving new marriage." His gaze slid back to Layla. "I just thought you might want to know what you're getting into, Carter. Layla has a habit of leaving men at the altar when better prospects appear." Before Ethan could respond, another guest approached their group, unaware of the tension. Victor used the interruption to make a smooth exit, but not before directing a final pointed look at Layla that carried unmistakable malice. It wasn't until they were in their car, safely away from prying eyes, that Ethan finally spoke. "Were you going to tell me?" Layla stared out the window at the passing city lights. "Eventually, when it became relevant." "When would that be exactly?" Ethan couldn't keep the edge from his voice. when Victor decided to use it against us publicly, when it affected the company. She turned to face him, her expression carefully neutral. It's complicated, Ethan. Then uncomplicated for me, he said, struggling to keep his tone even. You were engaged to Victor Grayson, a man whose company has tried to hostilely take over Carter Enterprises twice, 6 months ago. Then suddenly you're agreeing to marry me, a complete stranger. Layla's composed facade cracked slightly, revealing a flash of pain beneath. Yes, that's exactly what happened. Why? The question contained multitudes. Why did you leave Victor? Why did you marry me? Why didn't you tell me? Layla closed her eyes briefly, as if gathering strength. When she opened them, there was a vulnerability there he'd glimpsed only rarely. The morning of our wedding, I discovered Victor had been systematically stealing my company's proprietary software, she said. He'd been planning to force a merger once we were married, using my patents to bolster Grayson Technologies. The betrayal in her account was staggering. Ethan's anger receded, replaced by indignation on her behalf. He used you. I let myself be used, she corrected, her voice laced with bitter self-recrimination. I wanted to believe someone could want me for myself, not just my business acumen or my patents. I was blind to who he really was until it was almost too late. So you walked away? I walked away, she confirmed. Canceled the wedding, fired half my security team who'd been compromised, and spent 3 months rebuilding my company's firewalls. Her eyes met his, unflinching despite the vulnerability in them. 2 months later, your father approached me about the merger with Carter Enterprises. And you agreed because... Ethan let the question hang between them. Because your father was honest about his intentions, Layla said simply. He wanted a business merger, and he proposed a marriage to ensure its success. No pretense of romance, no false declarations of love, just business. Her hands twisted together in her lap. After Victor, the idea of a marriage without emotional entanglement seemed safer, cleaner. Ethan absorbed this, piecing together the timeline in his mind. That's why you accepted my vow so easily on our wedding night. You wanted it that way too. I thought I did, she admitted quietly, looking down at her entwined fingers. After Victor, I couldn't trust my own judgment about men, about love. A business arrangement felt like solid ground when everything else seemed treacherous. The revelation shifted something fundamental in Ethan's understanding of their marriage. What he'd seen as his father's final manipulation had also been Layla's refuge, a safe harbor after betrayal. Why didn't you tell me this before? He asked, his tone gentler now. Layla's laugh held no humor. When should I have mentioned it? During our business negotiations? On our wedding night when you were busy vowing never to love me? She shook her head. Besides, it's hardly the kind of past that inspires confidence. Hello, I'm your new wife and my last fiancé was using me to steal my company? The car pulled up to their building and they rode the elevator in silence, both lost in thought. Inside the penthouse, Layla kicked off her heels with a sigh, the simple domestic gesture somehow more intimate than their dance had been. I should have told you, she conceded, turning to face him. Victor is vindictive. He doesn't forgive what he perceives as betrayal. I knew we might encounter him eventually, and now he'll try to use our past to create problems for us, professionally and personally. Let him try, Ethan said, surprising himself with his vehemence. He crossed to where she stood, close enough to see the flecks of gold in her dark eyes. Victor Grayson doesn't know who he's dealing with. A small smile curved Layla's lips. Which one of us are you referring to? Both of us, Ethan replied without hesitation. Together. The word hung between them, pregnant with possibilities neither had anticipated when they'd entered into their arrangement. Together, Layla repeated softly. That's a change from your original position. Ethan reached for her hand, his fingers gently encircling her wrist, where he could feel her pulse quickening beneath his touch. I'm beginning to think, he said carefully, that my father might have been smarter than I gave him credit for. Chapter 4. The Breaking Point. How so? Layla asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He put me in the path of the most remarkable woman I've ever met, Ethan replied, the words emerging with a raw honesty that surprised even him. Even if I was too stubborn to see it initially, something like hope flickered in her eyes. Ethan, she began, but seemed unable to continue, emotion closing her throat. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, Ethan raised his hand to her face, his thumb gently tracing the curve of her cheekbone. "That vow I made on our wedding night," he said, his voice low and intense, "was made in anger and pride by a man who didn't know you." Her breath caught, but she didn't pull away from his touch. "And now?" The question was soft, vulnerable. "Now I'm beginning to know you," he said, "and I find myself wanting to know more, everything." The moment stretched between them, taut with possibility. Ethan leaned in slowly, giving her time to retreat if she wished. Instead, Layla's eyes fluttered closed, her lips parting slightly in silent invitation. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a question rather than a demand. Ethan's hand cradled her face, his touch reverent as he explored the softness of her lips, the warmth of her breath mingling with his. When they separated, both slightly breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "I should warn you," Layla whispered, her hands having found their way to his chest. Fingers splayed over his racing heart. "I'm not very good at keeping people at a safe distance." "Maybe neither of us needs safe distance anymore," he suggested, his arms circling her waist, drawing her closer. This time, when they kissed, all hesitation vanished. Layla's arms wound around his neck as she pressed against him, the barriers they'd maintained for months crumbling with each shared breath. Ethan lost himself in the taste of her, the silken feel of her skin beneath his hands, the soft sound she made as he deepened the kiss. When they finally broke apart, both flushed and breathing unevenly, Layla stepped back slightly, though her hands remained on his shoulders. "So," she said, her voice husky in a way that sent heat coursing through him, "where does this leave us?" Ethan considered the question seriously. "Honestly, I don't know. This isn't the arrangement either of us agreed to." "No," she agreed, a small smile playing at her lips. "It's becoming something else entirely." "Something real," he said, tucking a strand of hair that had escaped her elegant updo behind her ear, "if we want it to be." "I think I'd like that," she said softly. "Something real." The sound of Ethan's phone ringing shattered the moment. With reluctance, he checked the display. "It's Gregory," he said, frowning. "This late. It must be important." Layla nodded, stepping back to give him space. The loss of her warmth was immediate and unwelcome. "Gregory," Ethan answered, his voice shifting into professional mode. "What is it?" As he listened, his expression darkened. "When?" he asked sharply. "Are you sure?" Another pause. "No, don't do anything until morning. I'll handle it personally." When he ended the call, Layla was watching him with concern. "What's happened?" "Victor," Ethan said grimly. "He's called an emergency meeting with several of our major investors for tomorrow morning. Gregory's source says he's planning to question the legitimacy of our merger, citing undisclosed conflicts of interest." Understanding dawned in Layla's eyes. "Me. He's using my past with him to destabilize our company." "That's his plan," Ethan confirmed. "But we won't let him succeed." "What do we do?" she asked, practical even in crisis. "First we get some rest," Ethan said, checking his watch. "It's after midnight and we need to be sharp tomorrow." He touched her cheek gently. "This changes nothing between us, Layla, except perhaps making me even more determined to protect what we're building, both professionally and personally." Her smile was grateful, if tired. "Together," she reminded him. "Together," he agreed. Later, lying in his bed, Ethan found himself staring at the ceiling, replaying the evening's events. The revelation about Victor, the threat to their company, the seismic shift in his relationship with Layla. It was almost too much to process. A soft knock on his door pulled him from his thoughts. When he opened it, Layla stood there in silk pajamas, her face scrubbed clean of makeup, her hair loose around her shoulders. "I couldn't sleep," she said simply. "Too many thoughts." Ethan stepped back, inviting her in without words. When she slipped into his bed, it felt natural, inevitable, as if they'd been sharing this space for years rather than hours. She curled against him, her head finding the hollow of his shoulder, as if it had been designed for precisely that purpose. "Victor can't touch what's between us," Ethan murmured into her hair. "No matter what happens tomorrow." "I know," Layla replied, her voice already heavy with approaching sleep. "That's why he'll fail." As her breathing deepened into slumber, Ethan held her close, marveling at how completely his world had transformed in the space of a single evening. The stranger his father had chosen, the woman he'd vowed never to love, had somehow become the center of his universe. Some arrangements, it seemed, were destined to become much more than the sum of their practical parts. Chapter 5. Battle Lines. Ethan and Layla arrived at the offices of Carter Enterprises an hour before Victor's scheduled meeting with their investors. The building was quiet, most employees not yet arrived, giving them precious time to prepare. "Here's what we know," Gregory said, spreading documents across the conference table. "Victor has approached 5 of our major investors, claiming he has evidence that Layla's relationship with him represented a conflict of interest that should have been disclosed prior to your marriage and the merger." "That's absurd," Ethan scoffed. "There was no legal obligation to disclose a personal relationship that had already ended." "Legally, you're right," Gregory agreed. "But perception matters in business. Victor is planting seeds of doubt, suggesting Layla might have shared proprietary information about Grayson Technologies with Carter Enterprises, when in reality it was exactly the opposite," Layla said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "He was stealing from me." "Can you prove that?" Gregory asked. Layla hesitated. "Not conclusively. I discovered his plans before they were fully implemented, but the evidence is circumstantial. It would be his word against mine." Ethan placed a supportive hand on her shoulder. "Then we focus on the facts we can prove. The timeline of the merger, the independent valuation of both companies, the technical innovations that have emerged since we combined forces." They spent the next 45 minutes preparing their counterarguments, assembling documentation, and rehearsing their responses to likely accusations. As the meeting time approached, Ethan pulled Layla aside. "Are you ready for this?" he asked quietly. "Victor will try to provoke you, to make you appear emotional and unreliable." Layla straightened her shoulders, a steely determination in her eyes. "I've been underestimated by men like Victor my entire career," she said calmly. "They always mistake my gender or my appearance for weakness. It's an error that has cost them dearly." The confidence in her voice stirred something primal in Ethan's chest. Pride, admiration, and a deeper emotion he wasn't quite ready to name. "Let's show him exactly who he's dealing with," he said. When Victor arrived with the investors, his expression of smug confidence faltered momentarily at finding Ethan and Layla already in the boardroom, perfectly composed and surrounded by documentation. "Victor," Ethan greeted him with professional courtesy. "What a surprise to find you taking such an interest in our company's structure, especially so early in the morning." Victor recovered quickly, his smile sharpening. "Ethan, Layla, I'm merely exercising due diligence on behalf of potential investors in Grayson Technologies who have concerns about your unconventional merger." "How thoughtful," Layla replied, her voice cool but not hostile. "Though I'm surprised you didn't come directly to us with these concerns, rather than approaching our investors behind our backs." One of the investors, an elderly gentleman named Lawrence Brooks, cleared his throat uncomfortably. "We were under the impression that Mr. Grayson had attempted to address these concerns with you directly." "I'm afraid that's not accurate," Ethan corrected gently. "This is the first we're hearing of any formal concerns, though Mr. Grayson did make some vague insinuations at a charity event recently." Victor's eyes narrowed slightly. "Perhaps we should focus on the substantive issues rather than the communication methods," he suggested smoothly. "Specifically, the undisclosed personal relationship between myself and Mrs. Carter, prior to her hasty marriage and the subsequent merger." "There was nothing to disclose," Layla said simply. "My personal relationship with you, Victor, ended 3 months before the merger negotiations began and 5 months before my marriage to Ethan." "A relationship that ended under rather suspicious circumstances," Victor countered. "The morning of our wedding, as I recall." Ethan watched the investors exchanging uncomfortable glances. Victor was deliberately making this personal, trying to create an impression of scandal and impropriety. "Perhaps," Ethan suggested calmly, "we should focus on the business aspects of the merger, which, I believe, is what truly concerns our investors." He gestured to the documents on the table. "We've prepared a complete timeline of the merger process, including independent valuations of both companies, technical assessments of patent compatibility, and projected growth metrics, all of which have been exceeded in the months since the merger was completed. For the next hour, they methodically addressed each concern Victor raised, countering his insinuations with documented facts. Ethan noted with pride how Layla handled herself, calm, articulate, never rising to Victor's provocations, even when they became increasingly personal. The simple fact, Victor finally said, his frustration beginning to show, is that Layla had access to confidential Grayson Technologies information that could have influenced the terms of your merger. That's a serious accusation, Layla replied evenly. One that requires evidence, not speculation. Evidence like this. Victor removed a flash drive from his pocket, holding it up like a trophy. Records of your access to our secure servers during our relationship, including downloads of proprietary code that mysteriously appears in modified form in Carter Enterprises' new security protocol. The room fell silent. Ethan felt a cold knot forming in his stomach. He'd expected Victor to fight dirty, but fabricating evidence of corporate espionage was beyond what he'd anticipated. "May I see that?" Lawrence Brooks asked, extending his hand for the drive. Victor hesitated, then handed it over with reluctance that seemed carefully calculated. The technical details are complex, but the pattern of access and subsequent implementation is clear. As Brooks inserted the drive into his laptop, Layla leaned close to Ethan. "He's bluffing," she whispered. "I never accessed their code repositories. It's either fabricated or severely misrepresented." Ethan squeezed her hand under the table in silent support as Brooks reviewed the contents, his expression growing increasingly perplexed. "Mr. Grayson," Brooks said finally, "these logs show access to general documentation, not proprietary code, and the timestamps indicate all access occurred during normal business hours when Mrs. Carter, then Ms. Nova, was working on your collaborative project with her company." Victor's confident expression faltered. "The technical details require expert interpretation, which I happen to possess," Brooks interrupted dryly. "Before investing, Mr. Grayson, I make it a point to understand the technology I'm funding. These logs show nothing improper or unusual for a client-vendor relationship." The atmosphere in the room shifted perceptibly. The other investors, taking their cue from Brooks, began to examine Victor with new skepticism. "Perhaps there's been a misunderstanding," one of them suggested delicately. "Or perhaps," Ethan said, his voice perfectly controlled despite the anger burning in his chest, "this entire meeting was orchestrated to damage our reputation and destabilize our company for competitive advantage." Victor gathered his materials with barely concealed fury. "I was simply raising concerns shared by multiple industry observers," he said stiffly. "If you're satisfied with the explanations provided, then my obligation to transparent business practices is fulfilled." "Your concern for transparency is noted," Layla said, her tone making it clear she believed nothing of the sort. "Though in the future, direct communication might be more efficient than ambushing our investors." After Victor and the investors departed, Ethan closed the boardroom door and turned to Layla, who had collapsed into a chair, the strain of maintaining her composed facade finally showing. "You were magnificent," he said simply. "We both were," she corrected, a tired smile lifting the corners of her mouth. "But this isn't over. Victor doesn't accept defeat gracefully." "Let him come," Ethan said, pulling her to her feet and into his arms. "Whatever he tries next, we'll face it together." Layla rested her head against his chest, the steady beat of his heart grounding her. "Promise?" she asked softly. "Promise," he affirmed, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Some vows even I won't break." Chapter 6. Passion Unleashed. 3 days after Victor's failed attempt to undermine their company, Ethan was reviewing quarterly projections in his home office when Layla appeared in the doorway, her expression uncharacteristically hesitant. "Am I interrupting?" she asked. "Never," he replied immediately, setting aside his work. In the days since their confrontation with Victor, they'd been careful with each other, navigating the new intimacy between them with a tenderness that sometimes felt as fragile as it was precious. Layla entered, settling onto the leather sofa near his desk rather than taking the chair opposite him, a small but significant choice that indicated this wasn't a business conversation. "I've been thinking," she began, then paused, seeming to search for words. A dangerous pastime, Ethan teased gently, trying to ease her obvious tension. A smile flickered across her face. About us. About what's happening between us. Ethan's heart rate accelerated. "And what conclusions have you reached?" "Then I'm tired of waiting," she said simply. "Tired of being careful. Tired of pretending I don't want you every time you look at me." The directness of her statement sent heat coursing through him. Since their first kiss, they'd shared increasingly passionate moments, but always stopping short of complete intimacy, both perhaps wary of crossing that final boundary from arrangement to something irrevocable. "Layla," he began, his voice rougher than he intended. "If you don't feel the same," she said quickly, "I understand. We can forget I said anything and continue as we have been. But I needed you to know where I stand, what I want." Ethan rose from his desk, crossing to sit beside her on the sofa. "Do you want to know what I want?" he asked, taking her hand in his. She nodded, her eyes never leaving his face. "I want to wake up with you every morning," he said softly. "Not because we fell asleep talking, or because one of us had a nightmare, but because it's where we both belong. I want to learn every inch of you, every sound you make when I touch you, every secret place that makes you gasp." Layla's breathing had quickened, her pupils dilating as he spoke. "Ethan," she whispered, "I want to erase that ridiculous vow I made on our wedding night," he continued, his free hand rising to cup her cheek, "and replace it with a new one that acknowledges what I think we both already know." "Which is?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "That I'm falling in love with you," Ethan said, the truth of it settling into his bones as he spoke. "Not because of a business arrangement or my father's manipulation, but because of who you are. Your strength, your brilliance, your compassion that you try so hard to hide." Tears gathered in Layla's eyes, surprising both of them. "I never cry," she said, laughing shakily. "Ever." "Should I apologize?" he asked, wiping away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "God, no," she replied fervently. "I'm falling in love with you too, Ethan. Have been since that night in the storm, maybe even before. And it terrifies me because I never planned for this, never expected it." "The best things in life are rarely planned," he murmured, drawing her closer. "Sometimes they're arranged by meddling fathers with surprisingly good taste." Her laugh dissolved into a sigh as his lips found hers. Unlike their previous kisses, measured and careful, this one ignited instantly. Layla's arms wound around his neck, her body pressing against his, with an urgency that matched his own rising desire. "Bedroom?" she gasped against his mouth. "Now," Ethan said, standing and drawing her up with him. "Yours or mine?" he asked, trailing kisses down the column of her throat. "Whichever's closer," she replied, her fingers already working on the buttons of his shirt. They barely made it to his bedroom, shedding clothes along the way, hands and mouths hungry for skin, for contact, for the satisfaction of desire too long denied. When they finally reached the bed, Ethan paused, hovering above her, drinking in the sight of her, skin glowing in the late afternoon light streaming through the windows, eyes dark with desire, lips swollen from his kisses. "You're beautiful," he said reverently, "so beautiful it hurts to look at you sometimes." Layla reached up, her hand curving around the nape of his neck, drawing him down to her. "Then stop looking," she whispered against his lips, "and start touching." What followed was a revelation. The discovery of each other's bodies, the learning of preferences, the building of pleasure layer by exquisite layer. Ethan found himself cataloging every sound she made, every expression that crossed her face as he explored her with hands and mouth and body. Layla matched his intensity with her own, her touch alternately tender and demanding, her eyes never leaving his as they moved together. "Ethan," she gasped as tension built within her, her back arching. "Please." "I know," he murmured, his own control fraying. "Together. Look at me, Layla. Stay with me." Their release, when it came, was simultaneous and shattering. A perfect synchrony that seemed to transcend the physical, binding them in ways neither had anticipated when they'd begun this journey. Afterward, lying tangled in sheets and each other, Ethan traced lazy patterns on Layla's bare shoulder, as she rested her head on his chest. The silence between them was comfortable, weighted with significance, but lacking the awkwardness either might have expected. "I wish we could stay like this forever," Layla said eventually, her voice soft with contentment. "Just you and me. No Victor, no company, no complications." "We'll face the complications together," Ethan promised, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Whatever comes next." She propped herself up on one elbow, studying his face with an intensity that made his breath catch. "I never expected this," she admitted. "When I agreed to marry you, I thought I was choosing safety, predictability. And instead you got me," Ethan said ruefully. "Stubborn, difficult, emotionally constipated me." Layla laughed, the sound rich and genuine. "You're not so bad," she teased, dropping a kiss on his chest. "Once you get past the 'I will never love you' nonsense." "God, I was an ass," he groaned, covering his eyes with his arm. "How did you not walk out that first night?" "I saw something in you," she said simply. "Behind the anger and the walls, something worth waiting for." The sincerity in her voice humbled him. Ethan drew her down for a tender kiss, pouring into it all the emotions he was still learning to express in words. "I need to tell you something," he said when they separated. "Something I should have told you days ago." Concern flickered across her features. "What is it?" "Victor came to see me," Ethan admitted. "The day after the investor meeting. You were at the downtown office, and he appeared in my doorway without an appointment." Layla sat up, drawing the sheet around her. "What did he want?" "To threaten us," Ethan said bluntly. "He said he wasn't finished, that he had other ways to hurt you, to hurt us. And you didn't tell me because—" Her voice held no accusation, only curiosity. "Because I didn't want to ruin what was growing between us with his poison," Ethan explained. "Because I wanted to protect you, even though I know you don't need protection." Layla considered this, then nodded slowly. "I understand the impulse," she said. "But we're partners now, Ethan, in every sense. You don't have to shield me from unpleasantness." "I know," he acknowledged. "I'm still learning how to do this, how to be part of a true partnership. I've spent so long making decisions alone." She leaned forward, kissing him softly. "We'll learn together," she promised. "And as for Victor, let him try whatever he's planning. He doesn't understand what he's up against." "Us," Ethan said with conviction. "He's up against us." As the afternoon light began to fade, they remained entwined, talking softly of everything and nothing. Childhood memories, future dreams, simple pleasures they hoped to share. The business arrangement that had brought them together seemed increasingly distant, a cold and clinical beginning to what had blossomed into something warm and vital and real. "I never believed in fate," Layla murmured as sleep began to claim her. "But sometimes I wonder if your father knew exactly what he was doing." "If he did," Ethan replied, drawing her closer, "it's the one manipulation I'll forgive him for." In the growing darkness he watched her face in repose, marveling at the journey that had brought them here. The woman he'd vowed never to love now held his heart completely in her hands. The stranger his father had chosen had become essential to his happiness. Some vows, it seemed, were meant to be broken, and in their breaking, something far more precious could be found. Chapter 7. The Revelation. A month after Ethan and Layla had fully embraced their feelings for each other, the transformation in their relationship was evident to everyone around them. The cold, business-like arrangement had blossomed into a genuine partnership that radiated warmth and connection. Where once they had carefully maintained distance, now they moved in perfect synchrony, anticipating each other's needs, communicating with glances and subtle touches that spoke volumes. On a crisp autumn morning, Layla woke before Ethan, taking a moment to watch him in sleep. His features relaxed, vulnerable in a way he rarely allowed himself to be when awake. Love for him expanded in her chest, sometimes so overwhelming she could hardly breathe with the intensity of it. Careful not to wake him, she slipped from the bed they now shared every night and padded to the bathroom. As she brushed her teeth, she studied her reflection, noting the changes in herself since the wedding night, when she'd accepted Ethan's cold vow with such calm certainty that he would eventually break it. She was happier, softer somehow, though no less formidable in the boardroom. The walls she'd built after Victor's betrayal had gradually crumbled under Ethan's patient, persistent care. A wave of nausea suddenly rolled through her, breaking her reverie. Gripping the edge of the sink, Layla breathed deeply until it passed. The third morning in a row this had happened. A suspicion began to form in her mind, one that both thrilled and terrified her. Later that day, after confirming her suspicion with a home test, Layla sat in her office, staring unseeing at her computer screen. Pregnant. They had never discussed children. The topic seemed premature in a relationship that had only recently transcended its arranged beginnings. Yet now, it was a reality they would need to face. Would Ethan be happy? Would he see this as a welcome development or an unwelcome complication? The uncertainty gnawed at her, competing with the tentative joy blooming in her heart. Her phone chimed with a text from Ethan. "Dinner tonight, just the two of us. I have something important to discuss." Layla's heart raced. Had he somehow guessed? Or was this about something else entirely? She texted back a simple affirmative, then tried to refocus on work, though her mind kept drifting to the tiny life growing inside her, a perfect blend of her and the man she had never expected to love. That evening, Ethan took her to the rooftop restaurant where they'd had their first real date after the storm night that had changed everything between them. The city stretched below them, lights twinkling like earthbound stars, the night air carrying a hint of autumn crispness. "You're beautiful," Ethan said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "Have I told you that today?" "Only twice," Layla replied with a smile. "You're slipping." He laughed, but she could sense an underlying tension in him, a nervous energy that manifested in the way he tapped his fingers on the table, the way his eyes couldn't quite stay still. "Ethan," she said gently, "what is it you wanted to discuss?" He took a deep breath, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Layla's breath caught in her throat as he placed it on the table between them. "I know we're already married," he said, his voice low and earnest. "But that was an arrangement, a business transaction. This," he opened the box, revealing a stunning sapphire and diamond ring, "is a proposal. A real one." Tears pricked at Layla's eyes. "Ethan?" "Let me finish," he said softly. "Layla Nova Carter, I married you because my father arranged it. But I'm asking you now to choose to stay married to me because I love you. Because somewhere between I will never love you and this moment, you became the center of my world." The sincerity in his voice, the love shining in his eyes, broke something open inside her. Tears spilled down her cheeks as Ethan removed the ring from the box and slid it onto her finger alongside the simple platinum band from their wedding ceremony. "It's engraved," he said. Layla removed it to read the inscription inside. "Chosen, not arranged." "It's perfect," she whispered, looking back up at him. "And yes, I choose you, Ethan. Today and every day." He leaned across the table to kiss her, oblivious to the other diners, to anything but this moment of commitment that transcended their legal ties. When they separated, Layla took a steadying breath. "I have something to tell you too," she said, her hand unconsciously moving to her still flat stomach. Ethan's expression shifted to concern. "What is it? Is something wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," she assured him quickly, "but our family is about to get bigger." For a moment he looked confused, then understanding dawned in his eyes. "You're pregnant?" he asked, his voice filled with wonder. Layla nodded, suddenly uncertain. "I just found out today. I know we haven't discussed children, and it's so soon—" She didn't get to finish her sentence because Ethan was out of his chair, kneeling beside her, his hands cradling her face with infinite tenderness. "A baby," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Our baby? You're happy?" she asked, needing the confirmation. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," he said, his eyes suspiciously bright. "Layla, you've given me love I never expected to find, and now a family I never dared hope for." Relief and joy washed through her. "I love you," she said simply, because in that moment, no other word seemed adequate. Their celebratory dinner turned into a dreamy discussion of the future, names they liked, Whether the baby would have her eyes or his smile, how they would transform the spare bedroom into a nursery. It was a far cry from the coldly practical discussions that had characterized the early days of their arrangement. As they rode home in comfortable silence, Layla's hand intertwined with Ethan's, she marveled at the journey that had brought them here. From strangers, forced together by circumstance, to lovers creating a family, by choice. The elevator doors opened directly into their penthouse, and Ethan swept her into his arms the moment they closed behind them. "Mrs. Carter," he murmured against her lips, "mother of my child, love of my life." Each title was accompanied by a kiss more tender than the last. Layla wound her arms around his neck, surrendering to the love that had transformed a cold arrangement into the warmest of partnerships. Later, tangled in sheets and each other, Ethan's hand rested protectively over her stomach. "I never thought I'd have this," he admitted softly. "After my mother left, after watching my father's loveless existence, I convinced myself that business success was enough, that emotional connections were too risky, too painful, when they inevitably ended." "What changed?" Layla asked, though she thought she knew the answer. Ethan smiled, pressing a kiss to her shoulder. "You did. You with your quiet strength, your brilliant mind, your heart that you try so hard to protect, but that loves so fiercely once given. We changed each other," she corrected gently. "You made me believe in love again after Victor, made me trust that not every man with power would abuse it." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, the sapphire ring on Layla's finger catching the moonlight that streamed through the windows, a symbol of a promise freely given rather than reluctantly accepted. Neither of them noticed the blinking light on Ethan's phone, signaling a voicemail from Gregory that would shatter their perfect evening with news that Victor Grayson had returned, and this time he had come with weapons they hadn't anticipated. Chapter 8. The Ambush. The morning after their celebration, Ethan woke to find Layla already dressed for work, sitting on the edge of the bed with his phone in her hand, her expression grave. "What's wrong?" he asked immediately, sitting up. "Gregory called last night," she said, handing him the phone. 5 times. There's a voicemail." Ethan frowned, hitting play and putting the phone on speaker. Gregory's voice filled the room, tense and urgent. "Ethan, Victor Grayson has gone to the press with accusations against Layla, claims she stole proprietary code from Grayson Technologies. It's all over the business news. Call me immediately." Ethan's blood ran cold. He looked up at Layla, who was watching him, with a calm that he knew masked her inner turmoil. "I never stole anything," she said quietly. "He's lying." "I know," Ethan assured her, reaching for her hand. "But Victor has always been skilled at manipulating perception. We need to get ahead of this." They arrived at the office to find Gregory waiting in Ethan's office, his expression grim. "It's worse than I thought," he said without preamble. "Victor has provided what looks like compelling evidence. Access logs, code similarities, even emails supposedly between Layla and a Grayson developer discussing proprietary algorithms." "The emails are fabricated," Layla said immediately. "And any code similarities would be because we were working on parallel solutions to the same security challenges. I never stole anything from Grayson." "The board is concerned," Gregory continued. "They've called an emergency meeting for this afternoon. Several members are suggesting that Layla should step aside temporarily while an independent investigation is conducted." Ethan's jaw tightened. "That's exactly what Victor wants, to isolate Layla, to make her look guilty." "It might be the wisest course," Layla said quietly. Both men turned to look at her in surprise. "Not because I'm guilty, but because fighting this will distract from the company's operations. If I step aside voluntarily, it appears cooperative rather than forced." "Absolutely not," Ethan said firmly. "We stand together or not at all." The look Layla gave him was filled with love and something like regret. "This isn't just about us anymore," she reminded him, her hand briefly touching her stomach. "We have more to consider now." Understanding dawned in Ethan's eyes. She was thinking of their child, of creating stability, rather than prolonging a public battle that might damage the company they would one day pass to their heir. "Let me talk to Victor," he said suddenly. "Alone. Maybe there's a way to end this without either side losing face." "You'd ruin everything," he said. "You won't back down," Layla warned. "Not without getting something he wants." "Let me try," Ethan insisted. "For our family." The tenderness with which he said "our family" melted something in Layla's resistance. She nodded slowly. "Be careful," she cautioned. "Victor is at his most dangerous when he thinks he's winning." Ethan arranged to meet Victor at a neutral location, an upscale bar known for its private booths and discreet atmosphere. When he arrived, Victor was already there, nursing a scotch, a satisfied smile playing at his lips. "Ethan," he greeted, gesturing to the seat across from him. "How's married life treating you? Still enjoying my leftovers?" It took every ounce of Ethan's self-control not to react to the taunt. He settled into the chair, his expression carefully neutral. "Let's skip the pleasantries, Victor. What's your endgame here? What do you really want?" Victor leaned back, swirling his drink. "Simple. I want what's mine. The security architecture Layla developed uses fundamental concepts I shared with her during our relationship. Concepts that rightfully belong to Grayson Technologies." "You and I both know that's not true," Ethan replied evenly. "Layla developed those algorithms independently based on her own research." "Do we know that?" Victor asked, his eyes glittering with malice. "Or is that what your lovely wife told you? She can be very convincing when she wants something, Ethan. I learned that the hard way." Ethan's hands curled into fists beneath the table, but he kept his voice steady. "What would it take to end this, Victor? There must be something you want more than a protracted public battle." Victor studied him, seeming to weigh his options. "Joint patent rights," he said finally, "and a public statement acknowledging that elements of the security architecture were developed during Layla's association with Grayson." "That's not going to happen," Ethan said flatly. "Then I hope you are prepared for what comes next," Victor replied, draining his glass. "Because I'm just getting started. The fabricated emails were merely the opening salvo." A chill ran down Ethan's spine. "What do you mean?" Victor's smile was cold. "I have a witness, someone from Layla's former development team, who's prepared to testify that she explicitly discussed incorporating Grayson's security protocols into her personal projects." "Another lie," Ethan said with certainty. "Perhaps," Victor conceded with a shrug. "But it's a lie that will be very difficult to disprove, especially combined with the documentation I've already provided. At minimum, it will drag on for months, possibly years. Every victory your company achieves will be tainted by the suggestion of intellectual theft." Ethan leaned forward, his voice low and intense. "Why are you doing this, Victor? Is it really about the technology? Or is it because she chose me over you?" Something ugly flashed across Victor's features before he could mask it. "She didn't choose you," he spat. "She chose a convenient escape route when I got too close to the truth about her. Ask your wife what really happened the morning of our wedding. Ask her what she was doing in my private office at 5:00 a.m. The implication hung in the air between them. Ethan knew Victor was trying to plant seeds of doubt, to divide him from Layla at the moment they most needed to present a united front. "Whatever game you're playing," Ethan said, rising from his seat, "you won't win. Layla and I are stronger together than any lie you can fabricate." Victor's laugh followed him as he walked away. "We'll see about that, Carter. Give my regards to your wife, and congratulations on the baby. Children do change everything, don't they?" Ethan froze, turning slowly back to face Victor. "What did you say?" "Oh," Victor's expression was one of mock surprise. "Was I not supposed to know about that? My sources at your company are quite thorough." "Not very far along, is she? First trimester is so precarious. All sorts of things can go wrong when a mother is under extreme stress." White-hot rage surged through Ethan. He took a step toward Victor, hands clenched, before forcing himself to stop. This was exactly what Victor wanted, to provoke him into a public confrontation that would only lend credibility to his accusations. "Stay away from my family," Ethan warned, his voice deadly quiet, "or you'll discover exactly how far I'm willing to go to protect them." Victor merely raised his glass in mocking salute as Ethan strode from the bar, heart pounding with fury and fear. The fact that Victor knew about the pregnancy, something they hadn't shared with anyone yet, meant he had informants within Carter Enterprises. The realization was deeply unsettling. When Ethan returned to the office, he found Layla in their shared conference room, surrounded by legal documents, her expression focused and determined, despite the dark circles under her eyes that spoke of stress and worry. "How did it go?" she asked, looking up as he entered. Ethan closed the door before answering. "Not well. Victor isn't interested in a reasonable settlement. This is personal for him. He wants revenge, not compensation." Layla nodded as if this confirmed what she had already suspected. "And he's prepared to play very dirty to get it," she guessed. "Yes." Ethan hesitated, then added, "He knows about the baby, Layla. Somehow he already knows." Her hand went protectively to her stomach, her eyes widening with shock and alarm. "How is that possible?" "We haven't told anyone." "Has someone inside our company," Ethan said grimly. "Someone feeding him information, which means we can't trust that our communications are secure, even internally." Layla's mind was already racing ahead, her natural strategic thinking asserting itself despite her fear. "Then we change the game," she said, determination hardening her voice. "Victor expects us to play defense, to deny his accusations, to get bogged down in protracted legal battles, while public opinion turns against us." "What's the alternative?" Ethan asked. A slow, dangerous smile spread across Layla's face, the expression Ethan had come to recognize as a prelude to a brilliant countermove. "We go on the offensive. We bring everything into the light on our terms." As she outlined her plan, Ethan felt the knot of fear in his chest begin to loosen. This was the woman he'd fallen in love with. Brilliant, fearless, refusing to be victimized even when cornered. "It's risky," he cautioned when she'd finished. "If it backfires—" "Everything worth having involves risk," Layla replied, taking his hand. "Including love, including family. The question is whether the potential reward justifies the danger." Ethan looked at their intertwined fingers, at the sapphire ring glinting on her hand next to the simple wedding band, symbols of their journey from arrangement to love. "I'm with you," he said simply. "Whatever you decide." The tenderness in her eyes as she looked at him made his heart constrict. "That's why we'll win," she said softly. "Because Victor has never understood the power of true partnership. He sees relationships as transactions, as opportunities for control and manipulation. What we have is something he can't comprehend, let alone defeat." As they worked late into the night, preparing for the counterattack they would launch the following day, Ethan found himself watching Layla. Her focus, her determination, her occasional unconscious touches to her stomach where their child grew. The woman his father had chosen as a business arrangement had become his partner in every sense, the mother of his child, the love he had sworn never to feel. Some arrangements, it seemed, were guided by forces greater than mere business, strategy, or paternal manipulation. Some matches, however unlikely their beginnings, were simply meant to be. Chapter 9. The Counterstrike. The morning of the board meeting dawned clear and bright, belying the storm that was about to break. Ethan and Layla arrived together, presenting a united front that caught the attention of every employee they passed. Gone was any pretense of professional distance. Ethan's hand rested protectively at the small of her back, and the look they exchanged before entering the boardroom was one of absolute trust and partnership. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. Board members sat stiffly in their chairs, some avoiding eye contact, others watching Layla with barely concealed suspicion. Victor Grayson sat at the far end of the table, a position he had no right to occupy, but that no one had apparently challenged. "Thank you all for coming," Ethan began formally. "As you know, serious allegations have been made against my wife and co-CEO, Layla Carter. Allegations that, if true, would constitute a grave breach of ethics and potentially of law." Victor's smug smile grew as Ethan acknowledged the severity of the accusations, but that smile faltered as Ethan continued. "Rather than address these claims defensively or piecemeal, we've prepared a comprehensive response that I believe will settle the matter once and for all." He nodded to Layla, ceding the floor to her. Layla rose, her posture regal despite the pressure. "First, Let me state unequivocally that I have never stolen proprietary code or concepts from Grayson Technologies or any other company. The security architecture in question was developed from first principles I established during my doctoral research at MIT, years before I met Victor Grayson. She activated the presentation screen, displaying side-by-side comparisons of her early academic papers and the current security architecture. As you can see, the foundational concepts were published openly in academic journals as far back as 7 years ago. Several board members leaned forward, studying the comparison with newfound interest. Regarding the alleged emails between myself and Grayson developers, Layla continued, her voice steady, our technical team has conducted a forensic analysis that conclusively demonstrates these communications were fabricated. The metadata clearly shows manipulation of dates and content. Victor shifted uncomfortably in his seat as she presented the technical evidence, but his expression remained confident. He still believed he held the trump card, his supposed witness. But perhaps most damning, Layla said, her gaze now fixed directly on Victor, is what we discovered when we investigated the timing of these accusations. She nodded to Gregory, who distributed folders to each board member. These documents show that Grayson Technologies is in serious financial trouble. Their last 3 quarterly reports show declining revenues and mounting debt. More importantly, their primary investors have begun withdrawing support. Victor's face had gone pale. This is irrelevant to the issue at hand, he snapped. My company's financial status has no bearing on whether Layla stole proprietary code. On the contrary, Ethan interjected smoothly, it establishes motive. Your company is failing, Victor. You need a major infusion of capital or a revolutionary new product to stay afloat. Since you have neither, you've resorted to this desperate attempt to claim ownership of our successful security architecture. The board members were now openly studying Victor with suspicion, the tide of opinion visibly shifting. And as for your supposed witness, Layla added, delivering the final blow, Jasper Lee has already provided us with a sworn affidavit, stating that you offered him significant financial incentives to testify falsely against me. Victor surged to his feet. That's a lie. Lee approached me. Did he? Layla asked quietly. She activated an audio recording on her tablet. Victor's voice filled the room. 500,000, Lee, tax-free, deposited to the offshore account of your choice. All you have to do is confirm that Layla discussed incorporating our security protocols into her personal projects. The stunned silence that followed was deafening. Victor looked around the room, finding no allies among the faces that now regarded him with open contempt. This meeting is over, he snarled, gathering his materials. My attorneys will be in touch. A moment, Mr. Grayson, Lawrence Brooks, the eldest board member, spoke for the first time. Before you go, I believe the board would like to make its position clear. Victor paused, weariness creeping into his expression. We have complete confidence in Layla Carter's integrity and her leadership of this company, Brooks stated firmly. Furthermore, we will be instructing our legal team to pursue all available remedies against you personally and against Grayson Technologies for defamation, corporate espionage, and attempted extortion. Victor's face contorted with fury. You'll regret this, he spat, his gaze fixing on Layla. All of you. As he stormed from the room, an almost tangible wave of relief swept through the remaining attendees. Board members approached Ethan and Layla, offering support and congratulations on their handling of the crisis. When they were finally alone in the boardroom, Ethan pulled Layla into his arms, holding her tightly. You were magnificent, he murmured against her hair. Absolutely magnificent. She laughed shakily, the tension of the past days finally catching up with her. We were magnificent, she corrected, pulling back to look at him. I couldn't have done it without you. That's what partnership means, Ethan said simply. Facing challenges together, being stronger as a unit than either could be alone. Layla's smile was luminous. Who would have thought that cold arrangement on our wedding night would lead to this? A true partnership, a family on the way. Ethan's hand came to rest on her still flat stomach. Speaking of which, I think we should tell the board about the baby. After what just happened, they deserve some good news. And Victor's informant will have nothing left to leak, Layla agreed. Besides, I'm going to start showing soon enough. They shared a kiss that was both tender and triumphant, a celebration of their victory and a promise of the future they would build together. Later that evening, as they walked hand in hand along the river that wound through the city, Layla suddenly stopped, turning to face Ethan with an expression of wonder. "What is it?" Ethan asked, concerned by her sudden stillness. "I just realized something," she said softly. "For the first time since I discovered Victor's betrayal, I feel completely free of his shadow, like the last chain binding me to that part of my life has finally broken." Ethan tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch gentle. "You were never defined by what he did," he said. "Not to me." "I know," she acknowledged. "But there was always a part of me that wondered if I'd ever truly escape the damage he caused, if I'd ever trust completely again." Her eyes, luminous in the gathering twilight, met his. "And now I do. I trust you, Ethan, with my heart, my future, our child's future, completely." The simple declaration moved him more deeply than flowery protestations of love ever could. Ethan drew her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in his world, because she was. "I love you, Layla Carter," he whispered against her lips. "Not because my father arranged our marriage, but because fate knew what we needed before we did." As they kissed beneath the first stars of evening, the river flowing steadily behind them, both felt the sense of a chapter closing and a new one beginning, one written not by external forces or business arrangements, but by their own choosing, their own love. Chapter 10. Full Circle. 1 year to the day after their wedding, Ethan stands in the doorway of their bedroom, watching Layla as she gently rocks their 3-month-old daughter, Aria, humming a soft lullaby. The scene before him fills his heart with such profound love that he can barely breathe with the weight of it. Aria, with her mother's rich brown skin and her father's green eyes, is a perfect blend of them both. Strong-willed like Layla, quick to smile like Ethan on his better days. She had arrived amid a spring thunderstorm that had rattled the hospital windows, a fitting entrance for a child born of 2 powerful personalities. "Are you going to stand there all night?" Layla asked without turning around, a smile in her voice. "Or are you going to join us?" "Just admiring the view," Ethan replies, crossing to stand behind her, his arms encircling both wife and daughter, the 2 most precious women in the world. Layla leans back against his chest, her head finding the hollow of his shoulder as naturally as if they've stood this way for decades rather than months. "She's finally asleep," she whispers. "Your daughter has your stubbornness about bedtime, and her mother's determination to get her way eventually," Ethan counters with a soft laugh. Together, they place Aria in her crib, both holding their breath as they ease her down, exhaling in unison when she remains asleep. They stand side by side, watching the gentle rise and fall of their daughter's chest, marveling, as parents have done since time immemorial, at the miracle they've created. "Happy anniversary," Ethan murmurs as they slip from the nursery, closing the door silently behind them. "You remembered," Layla says, genuine pleasure warming her voice. "Of course I remembered. I have plans for us," he says, taking her hand and leading her to the living room, where he's arranged a surprise. The furniture has been pushed back, creating an open space in the center of the room. Candles flicker on every surface, casting the space in a warm golden glow, reminiscent of that stormy night, when they'd first begun to see each other as more than an arrangement. "What is this?" Layla asks, a smile playing at her lips. Ethan activates a remote, and soft music fills the air, the same bluesy melody she'd been dancing to when he'd caught her unawares all those months ago. "I thought we might recreate some memories," he explains, extending his hand. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Carter?" Layla laughs, a sound of pure joy, as she steps into his arms. "You're being sentimental, Mr. Carter. I wouldn't have expected it." "You've changed me," he admits, drawing her close as they begin to move to the music, in all the best ways. They dance slowly, bodies pressed together, swaying more than actually dancing. Layla's head rests against Ethan's chest, where she can hear the steady beat of his heart, the rhythm that has become the soundtrack to her happiness. "Do you ever think about that night?" she asks. "Our wedding night, when you made that ridiculous vow never to love me?" Ethan's laugh rumbles beneath her ear. "Only every day," he admits, usually with profound gratitude that I failed so spectacularly at keeping it." Layla lifts her head to look at him, her eyes soft with memory. "I knew you would," she confesses. "From the moment you made it, I knew it was a promise you couldn't keep." "How?" Ethan asks, genuinely curious. "I was so convinced of my own immovable heart." "Because of the way you looked at me," she says simply. "Even through your anger and resentment, there was something in your eyes that recognized me, not as an arrangement or an obligation, but as a woman who might matter to you someday." The insight strikes Ethan with its accuracy. Even in that first confrontation, there had been something about Layla that had called to him beneath his conscious awareness. A recognition of something essential, a possibility he tried desperately to deny. "You were right," he acknowledges, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Thank God you were right." The music changes to something slower, more intimate. Layla's arms wind around Ethan's neck as they continue their gentle swaying. "I have something for you," he says after a comfortable silence. "A gift to mark the occasion." "Ethan, you didn't need to—" "I wanted to," he interrupts gently, leading her to the sofa where a slim, wrapped package waits on the coffee table. "Open it." Layla settles beside him, taking the package with curiosity. She unwraps it carefully to reveal a handcrafted leather album. Opening the cover, she gasps softly at what she finds inside. Photographs, dozens of them, professionally mounted and captioned. "Your photography," she breathes, recognizing the style from the few examples he'd reluctantly shown her. "These are yours, from before." Aisha nods, watching her face as she turns the pages. "I started again," he explains. "After Arya was born, I realized I wanted to capture our family, our life together, through my own eyes rather than just letting the moments slip away. The images tell the story of their journey. The penthouse at sunset, Layla asleep on the sofa during her pregnancy, her hands cradling her swollen belly. Arya's tiny hands and feet in extreme close-up, capturing every perfect detail. And, most movingly, Layla holding their newborn daughter, her face transformed with a love so raw and powerful it radiates from the page. "These are beautiful," Layla says, tears gathering in her eyes. "Not just technically, but because of how you see us, how you see me." "It's just the truth," Ethan says simply. "How could I not capture it?" Layla sets the album aside carefully, then turns to him with a smile that still, after all this time, takes his breath away. "I have something for you too," she says, though it's not wrapped as nicely. From the pocket of her robe, she withdraws a small white stick. Ethan stares at it for a moment before recognition dawns, his eyes widening as they fly to her face. "Are you—" he begins, hardly daring to hope. Layla nods, her smile widening. "Pregnant, yes, about 6 weeks along. Ari is going to be a big sister." Joy explodes through Ethan like a supernova. He gathers Layla into his arms, lifting her off the sofa and spinning her around, their laughter mingling in the candlelit room. "Another baby!" he marvels when he finally sets her down, his hands coming to rest on her still flat stomach. "Another miracle!" "Are you happy?" Layla asks, though she can clearly see the answer in his face. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," Ethan replies fervently. "Layla, you've given me everything I never knew I wanted. A love I never thought possible, a family I never dared dream of." She rests her forehead against his, their breath mingling in the small space between them. "Not bad for an arranged marriage," she says. "The best arrangement of my life," Ethan agrees, his voice thick with emotion. "Though I think we've transcended the original terms of the contract." "Significantly," Layla agrees with a laugh. As they stand together in the home they've made, their daughter sleeping peacefully down the hall, another child already growing beneath Layla's heart, the journey from that tense wedding night to this moment of perfect happiness seems both impossibly long and surprisingly inevitable. Ethan Carter had married a stranger by his father's choice, but the woman in his arms now is no stranger. She is his partner, his lover, the mother of his children, the center of his world. A woman he knows more intimately than he knows himself. A woman he has chosen every day since that first reluctant vow was broken. "I love you," he whispers against her lips as he draws her toward their bedroom. "Today, tomorrow, always." "I love you too," Layla replies, her eyes shining with a happiness neither could have imagined on their wedding night. "Which just goes to show what?" Ethan asks, pausing at the threshold of their room. Layla's smile is radiant in the dim light. Some promises are meant to be broken, and some arrangements are destined to become so much more. As he gathers her into his arms, Ethan silently thanks his father's manipulative spirit for the one gift that truly mattered, the woman who had transformed a cold business arrangement into the greatest love story of his life.